The year is 2014, the Xbox One and PS4 have only just been released for just over a year at this point. Ubisoft are planning their newest Assassin's Creed game that will be the first next-gen official game in the franchise. On the 11th of November, Ubisoft released two different games, one being Assassin's Creed Unity, and the other one being Assassin's Creed Rogue. However, the latter, sadly, was hidden in the shadows by the game that came out for the next-gen only experience, which was Unity. I'll definitely be making a video about Rogue, and they're both definitely worth the playthrough, as they both work into one another in a way that everyone who has played both games was just wowed by. Assassin's Creed Unity was the game that was going to change the franchise forever. However, it didn't go in the direction that Ubisoft were hoping for. Just 1 year later, Assassin's Creed Syndicate came out, and after a bad couple of years, they started development on the new gen Assassin's Creed games, and with that, Origins and Odyssey was started. Now though, we're currently talking about a couple years too far ahead in the franchise, so let's bring it back a little. We're back in 2014. Earlier that year, AC Unity was shown off at E3. The trailer was massive and epic, and was something that when the game was going to be coming out just looked incredible. However, if AC Odyssey was the magnum opus of the new gen Assassin's Creed experience, I would say AC Unity was the magnum opus of last gen Assassin's Creed games. This game started development in 2011, right after Ubisoft Montreal finished making Brotherhood. They started development of AC Unity. And with the dev Caroline Mios, took 2 years by herself to make Notre Dame in Unity, which honestly looks incredible. It's not confirmed nor denied whether or not Unity was used to help rebuild parts of Notre Dame when it was needing to be fixed after the fire that happened. However, that wasn't what was going on in 2014 either. What was happening in 2014 was the launch of AC Unity. So what really did happen? Well, on day one, the game was being destroyed by the public point of view. This game was ridiculously buggy, and that was the main criticism of this game. This isn't something that I'll be focusing on this video, however I do have a lot of opinions about this game, and I'd like to discuss them in this video that we're talking about today. However, before we do get into this video, if you wouldn't mind leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, these videos do take a very long time to make. For example, this one is borderline 6 weeks in the making as of recording this right now, so probably about 7 by the time it's uploaded. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind leaving a like, subscribing for this type of content. I upload one critique style a month, roughly. I try to anyway. The next one is going to be Red Dead Redemption 2, as I've recently played through that. I upload whatever I want on a Wednesday, and I upload gaming content every single Friday. And then as well as that, if you wouldn't mind joining the Discord down below, if you have any different opinions to me about this video, let me know in the comments. Join the Discord, we can have a chat about it. The Discord's not yet fully finished, still needs to be finished, and I'll work on that soon. So yeah, make sure to join the Discord if you want to have a chat about it. Let me know in the comments as well. And yeah, with that all being said, let's talk about what my 12-year-old self thought about this game when first getting into it. So when I first ever played this game, like I said, when I was 12, I experienced 0 bugs, or at least 0 that were noticeable anyway, because I do not remember having any bugs go on in this game, and on my most recent playthrough I only had one that really sticks out in my mind. I had none besides this. The one that I am going to describe is about Mirabeau, and when he dies later on in the game, his clothing being doubled up on top of himself for some reason made his death a little bit less impactful, obviously, because it was a bit just funny when it did happen, but overall it wasn't anything outrageous like, you know, when the game first came out. This doesn't mean that I think this game has never had bugs or never had any big issues or still doesn't have big issues to this day. It is just the case of, throughout my experience of playing this game, I've not experienced them, and my take on the bugs is something that I will talk about later on. So yeah, once we get to that part of the gameplay section, you'll hear about my thoughts on the bugs, especially at release. I found that most people that I knew either experienced hardly any bugs to the point where it just didn't irritate them, or even just none at all. However, what I do think screwed this game up was the types of bugs and glitches that happened when this game came out, as they were absolutely outrageously funny, ridiculous, and honestly spread like wildfire on the internet. And with that, 1 week went by and Assassin's Creed's reputation was completely down the drain, which at the time was something that was actually a massive push in the gaming community, and the open world environment they created in Paris, the graphics in the game as well stand up to games today, but most notably the parkour system is something that this game does to such an amazing degree that hardly anything has ever been able to come close to it. The parkour in this game is actually a skill that you can acquire. It's something that you do get good at through practice that is unheard of throughout the entire rest of the franchise. This game as a whole is something that I personally think is let down by two things: the time it came out, and secondly, the drop off of character and story this game experiences once you surpass sequence 7 and 8. But besides those two things, I would say that this is one of the best Assassin's Creed titles, and is far by the most polished old gen Assassin's Creed game you're ever going to get. Now to begin with, we're going to be talking about the story of this this game. This video will be laid out a little bit differently to the other ones. This is probably more of a properly laid out critique than I've ever done before. As I've said about these critiques is that I try to one-up myself every single critique. I've got in mind what I want to do for Red Dead, but that doesn't matter because it's not the Red Dead video. So what we're going to be talking about today is the main story first, then I'm going to talk about what I liked, what I disliked, and how I would change the main story to fit how I believe the game would have worked out better. Then after that I'm going to be talking about the lack of modern day story, the immersion, the gameplay, and then lastly my overall thoughts and ratings of the game as a whole. So yeah, if that is something that interests you, make sure to go check this out. All the timestamps will be below if you just want to skip ahead and see different parts. If you're only here for different areas of this video, then make sure to go check them out. Timestamps will be below and you'll be able to click on them throughout the video. So yeah, let's get into the main story. The opening of Assassin's Creed Unity is showing us the downfall of the Templar Order, which honestly feels very similar to the fall of Masyaf. This intro, at least the intro sequence anyway, is honestly something that no other game does to this degree. You feel an actual sympathy towards the Templars in this moment. You feel somewhat connected as well to Jacques de Molay, a Templar you've never heard about, and the man you play as well. We're getting a perspective from the Templars that is honest, showing you how naive the man is as well that you're playing as, thinking that just because the assassins fell at Masyaf, with the mentor explaining how, and I quote, "The anarchic delusions are virulent as a plague, and less easily eradicated," which also reminds me of the quote that you get from Haytham when he says, "Even when your kind appears to triumph, we rise again. And do you know why? It's because the order is born of a realization. We require no creed, no indoctrination by a desperate old man. All we need is the world to be as it is, and this is why the Templars will never be destroyed." Both sides and their beliefs are so rooted into our brains' wiring that no matter what happens, the Templars could be completely eradicated and all the assassins and everything that is known about them, and yet their ideology will always come back, as freedom is in our nature as much as the want for security is in our nature as well. You're ordered to go hide the Templar artifacts, which you'll then later find out is the Sword of Eden and the Ancient Book, which is actually a codex written by the Grand Master, who is also a sage of some sort, I believe. This book contains all the knowledge that he's found out about the first civilization. After hiding away the sword in the codex books, an assassin will come out of the castle and assassinate you, and then you'll get a cutscene from 7 years later. This cutscene to this day is one of the best in the AC franchise. This cutscene is to mimic the excommunication of the Templar Order in real life. After this, you'll then be introduced to Bishop, who is one of the only people you really speak to when it comes to the assassins modern day. As your character, the quote initiate, is more of a mindless nothingness, your character doesn't really matter. This was done because one of the main complaints of every single game that came before it was that you're spending too much time out of the Animus, and you're having to be taken out of the main story that's being told. This was nice for sure, but also I feel like this was only really done at the time because Ubisoft were unsure of what they wanted to do with the modern day story, as it's very hard to make someone care about something that's one-upping a Doomsday plot without undermining the previous main plot. An example of this in modern media anyway would be Marvel. Currently Marvel are in that stage where they're having to find their footing once again to build back up to something that will give the same level of entertainment and scarcity of something like Thanos. It's one of those things that a lot of people end up having to deal with when it comes to their stories overall, purely because it is really hard to one-up Doomsday plots. Now though, once you're back in the Animus, you're going to start playing as Arno Dorian as a child. You'll then be introduced to Arno's dad properly in a way that you get to see from a child's perspective, which is the idea that children don't actually know their parents too well. He'll then tell Arno not to do any exploring and wait for him after giving you the pocket watch to indicate when he's going to be coming back. However, as kids, they're rebellious and they will just go against what their parents' wishes are, so he ends up following a red-headed girl who will tempt you into stealing an apple. After this, you'll see a guard who will become alert and basically start heading inside. Arno will go to hand himself in, basically out of childish ignorance, basically believing, that everything kind of evolves around them, and thinking that all the guards are being like this purely because he stole an apple. After following the girl who you know to end up being Elise back to where all the massive fuss is coming from, you end up finding out that Arno's dad is dead. And you can really feel the emotion in this scene overall, which is Arno just unsure of how to react and is in basically complete devastation. Elise's dad will then give a handout, which is him then becoming his ward. You'll then be looking down at the broken pocket watch and it will then be 13 years later. Victor comes rushing into the room with pure rage, and then you'll find out that this watch was actually put towards gambling, which for me honestly says that Arno has a bit of a gambling issue, if not just a general addiction issue. When you're gambling personal belongings that have massive meaning to you, then you're definitely in a little bit too deep. You're also being introduced to Arno and his personality properly at this point, one that honestly could rival Ezio if they had doubled down on it anyway. During the beginning phase, you're going to learn about how the parkour system works, which is very much required because in comparison to other games, this is the most you're ever going to get with parkour, especially in terms of technicality. Once you've escaped, you'll head to the Delasare estate. This will give you the idea of how people around around Arno view him. You'll meet Francois de la Serre, who is Elise's father, who you can actually tell does care about Arno, to a decent degree anyway. It'll cut to Arno talking to a picture of Elise, and just from the sentence alone that you end up hearing, you can basically tell what type of relationship they have for one another. In Arno's conversation with de la Serre, you'll also be brought to the idea of how their relationship works as well. They seem close, and he seems like he's actually done a good job of raising Arno anyway, obviously though not tempting him down the route of the Templar Order, as Arno is meant to choose that for himself, and de la Serre is very aware of who Arno's dad was. You'll learn that Elise is in town, and Arno will then be told to go help Olivier, who needs help down by the horses. After sending the carriage off that has de la Serre in it, a man will end up running up to you who wants to deliver a letter of great importance to him. After chasing it down, it turns out that you've in fact been following the wrong carriage. You'll meet a man who seems really insignificant, but is actually extremely important. You won't know this obviously at this time, but basically, let's just say this entire opening is hiding all of the main villains in plain sight. You'll head to go and find a bird's eye view and climb to the top of a church and get a first synchronization in. You'll see Elise and her father and basically start heading to the gallery to try and deliver this letter. After getting inside, you'll walk into some form of political moment where de la Serre walks away and Victor will basically be there also trying to get Arno. You'll see de la Serre talking to a man that you basically don't know who it is. Obviously, once you've played the game, you'll learn that the guy who he is actually talking to is one of the council members of the Brotherhood, and basically the main leader of the Brotherhood as well, as at the time they did have a truce going as well. After getting a quick combat tutorial overall, you'll end up beating both Victor and his brother. Arno will then run off back to the estate because he's being chased down by the police. As Arno was unable to give him this letter, he'll end up slipping it under de la Serre's office. He'll then get changed into some more fancier clothes so that he can make his way into the gallery. Arno will sneak his way in, and you'll actually get something. There is a massive important mechanic to Assassin's Creed. Stealth. They finally added it, just clicking the crouch button. How amazing. They did it after however many years. But yes, in this game you then have crouching, which honestly it would take 7 entries in the franchise, which is actually the 5th main game in this franchise, for them to add a crouching button where you can hide behind cover. But this was obviously a very welcome change. After you've made your way through the guarded areas, you'll walk past all the guests, and if you activate Eagle Vision in these moments, you'll also find and see all the different Templars who are there. Obviously, you don't actually know who they are at this point, but you'll be able to listen into little ideas of what's going on, but you won't get a full idea. You'll walk out into the main floor where Arno will ditch the girl that he is with, just basically because he wants to catch up to Elise. After following her, you'll get one of the most real and honest, impressive in all forms of animation at the time. The emotion in this moment, the animations match so well together. It's kind of very impressive, so very good work to the animation team, and also just the voice actors. It's very well done. Elise will make Arno jump out the window, and you'll end up having to sneak your way out, and you'll see a man stumbling out in the courtyard. It turns out, oh, it's de la Serre, so yeah, the other father figure in Arno's life is about to die. You'll see 2 men run off and hide whilst Arno is trying to save de la Serre. Arno will then be whisked away to prison as he's been framed for the murder of de la Serre. You're now in Paris and you can hear the violin playing as you're going across this scene, which is trying to give you the idea and ambience of this entire place. I have to give it to them, this game does do some amazing stuff with the audio, and especially when you consider Assassin's Creed games prior, this is actually something insane. And even games that came out after struggle to get the audio done to this degree. After Arno wakes up, he'll go look at the wall where there is tons of just markings on it. After speaking to all the people in the cell, you'll head to sleep and Arno will basically just awake and find out that one of the men who's by all the markings on the wall has got your father's watch. Arno is in a full state of anger at this point, and the man who you'll later learn to be an assassin called bellow will then make you fight him to gain back the watch. He was a character that a lot of people did love, especially in the first few sequences of the game, but sadly, it just kind of all falls to the sidelines later on in the game. After beating him, Arno will then basically tell him that he can see all the drawings on the wall, and after that, Bellow will then know that Arno actually has the 6th sense, which Bellow will then make Arno become more aware of what his father was, which was an assassin, and Arno will basically be asked to join. The game will skip ahead some time, and the revolution is brewing outside the prison. Arno and Bellow will then sneak out of the prison. Sadly, they can't actually sneak out properly, so they end up having to run out of the building. After climbing the walls and taking down a few guards, you'll be at the top of the Bastille, where Bellow will tell Arno that the only way out is to jump. Bellow will tell Arno to come join the assassins, and he'll then jump straight off. Arno will be following him very soon. You'll get this very amazing flying shot over Paris, where you'll see the title cards start to appear. This has to be one of my favourite openings overall in the Assassin's Creed franchise. I will explain later why I love this opening. That is one of the sections later on in this video. Arno will then head back to the de la Serre estate to find Elise. Arno doesn't know that Elise is a Templar, or that his dad was an assassin until finding out from Bellow. She already knew both of these things, and she'll then show Arno the letter that was meant to be delivered, that Arno didn't deliver, that was in fact warning Delaserre of what was about to happen in the plot against his life. You're back in Paris and see Arno on top of a building, looking down at the broken watch and just drinking his life away. And with that, the first sequence of this game has been completed, and you're now going to move on to the rest of his life and story that this game has to offer. You'll head into a chapel and you'll find your way into the assassin's hideout, where Bellow is actually waiting for you in the shadows, and he'll take you straight to the Assassin's Council. This is one of the first times in this game that you're actually going to see that the assassins aren't led by one particular person. They kind of are, but in this it's more of an actual council itself. You kind of see the council in other games like Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood. But in both those games, it's the case of you don't really know what's happening in terms of the Assassin's elements of the first game of those two, and then in Brotherhood, it's the case of the Council are more prevalent, but Ezio is the master of the Assassins by the end of it. After getting into a little talk about the Assassins and what they stand for, Arno will then take a swig of some drink and he'll basically end up hallucinating. After a trippy moment where Arno will be hunting himself down in a symbolic reference for the fact that he has been the issue for everything that has gone on in his life, or at least that's how he views himself, and that he's really been running from his true purpose his entire life. After he assassinates himself, he'll end up awakening in front of the council, officially indoctrinated into the creed, and be told the tenets of the creed. You're given a hidden blade, and Arno will now be an assassin officially. You're then briefly taken out of the Animus, where you'll end up talking to Bishop once again. Well, more again that she's talking directly at you as the initiate, aka the, so-called assassin at this point, but you're not really doing anything, like I said. So you and Arno now get put into the Creed at the same time as the Unity story begins. Basically, kind of like a reference to the fact that you're joining the Creed, and the moment Arno joins the Creed, you're technically joining as well. It's kind of that sort of thing. Also, just for some fun Assassin's Creed knowledge, if any of you are interested anyway, the DNA sequence that you're learning about in this game is from John Standish, who is the main villain of the Modernday section in Black Flag, and he was the sage, so someone who was basically able to see the precursor images and that sort of thing in his memory, and know more about the Isu than most people. So this leads you on a treasure hunt through time once again, like Desmond said in Assassin's Creed 3, I think anyway. I couldn't actually find the quote, but yeah, I love that quote. I think it just works in Assassin's Creed, but yeah, I love it. You'll now be in Sequence 3, where they're basically setting you up for how the new assassination missions work in this game. I'll explain in the gameplay section why I called it the new way of taking down enemies. But anyways, you'll talk to Bellow and you'll basically head down to your position. Bellow has become Arno's mentor, but you can kind of tell to a degree that Arno isn't an assassin just because he necessarily believes in their beliefs. You'll sneak around and prepare the area, and after doing a little bit of waiting around in your position, Sivert will walk by and talk about some plans. After taking down the man that you're there to kill, you'll use some smoke bombs, run away from the guards, and whilst you're running through Paris, you'll meet some of the Patriots, who are trying to impose their fanatic beliefs upon the people, and they're the ones that the Templars use as guards as well, so it's kind of that point where they're more fanatics than anything. They kind of do talk about this a lot in this game, where they talk about how the Templars in this game, or at least the bad version of the Templars, are just more fanatics than anything else. They aren't true Templars. You'll hear some more about Belloc's thoughts on the truce that has been done between the Templars and the Assassins properly. He makes some points about both sides can't really live together, which is kind of what you get told throughout the entire time of this game, which you kind of get told about over and over again throughout each Assassin's Creed game. I think it's kind of interesting that this is the first game that kind of addresses it properly. They actually proved that, the Templars and the Assassins were able to do things and move on with their lives when, they were working together a little bit more and they had a truce. They weren't just trying to kill each other. Whilst talking to the council, Arno will then get lectured about why his emotions shouldn't cloud his judgment, and after talking about this mission, Arno will be sent to kill Sivert, which is kind of, a bit random considering he was basically being moaned at for wanting to kill Sivert, and then he's now being tasked to kill him. I don't know. I think it works, obviously, because the whole point is that Arno wants to avenge the people who killed Delaserre, but it's kind of, I just feel like they lectured him about it and all this stuff. It felt very Jedi Council-like. So everyone who loves Star Wars out there, you may understand what I mean. It kind of just feels like a bit of a lecture that, Anakin gets over and over again throughout the Clone Wars and in the prequels. Once you're near Notre Dame, you'll begin the first proper assassination mission in this game. With this, you'll basically end up entering Notre Dame to assassinate your target. This is the same mission that was shown off at E3, so I'm glad that basically it was put right at the beginning of the game. So, you know, it didn't basically look like they were just going, oh, let's take our best mission in this game and just shove you in there and use that as E3 footage. And it's like, I think this was very good placement, basically. After killing him, you'll basically see into his memories, which will basically tell you about the King of Beggars and give you a lead. And in this game, the assassins are kind of treated more like detectives than anything else, I'd say, because they use the premise lead a lot. They talk about a lot more detective work, and considering some of the side content of this game is detective work, I do kind of like that, as that is kind of what they do throughout their assassins, at least the upbringing of the Assassin's Brotherhood in each game. They do a lot more detective work and truce work than anything else, and then lead into killing people basically later. Once you're out of the area, a server sweep will begin, and basically it's kind of the only areas of this game where it's kind of a little bit like, you know, trying to give you an idea like, oh, just remember that there is a modern day plot of this game, but, you know, it's not necessarily too important, so yeah. Once you jump through the server bridge though, you'll be brought into 1898, where you'll be running around Paris, and you'll be going through the underground tunnels. You'll climb the Statue of Liberty that shouldn't be in France at this point of history. However, because the Animus is glitching, everything like that, it's still in France for some reason, and basically you'll end up going through the bridge again, and you'll be back in Arno's time again. You'll make your way back into the hideout. Arno will then be talking to the council members, and basically end up getting told that he needs to go kill the King of Beggars. You'll then receive this game's staple weapon, which is the Phantom Blade, which, to be honest, I didn't really use too much on my playthrough of this game. I kind of did start to use it a little bit later down the road because it helps with a lot of like the harder areas of this game if you haven't been doing side content like I was doing with this playthrough. But generally speaking, I think they definitely wanted you to use it a little bit more, but when you are playing the game, you know, however many years later at this point, I think it's like 8 years later, it's the case of you kind of forget the Phantom Blade's existence as it doesn't get brought into the game until now, which is basically just, like I said, it's just a fancy version of the throwing dart and the poison dart. So, you know, it's there, but it's not necessarily useful. It's literally just the throwing dart, poison dart, just instead of you throwing something, you are literally just shooting it out of your wrist. It's just a different animation, but does the exact same thing. You end up seeing Latucci, who you've seen once before. He is the lieutenant of the King of Beggars, and he is there basically just ordering someone's leg to be cut off. Arno ends up meeting a man, though, when he's about to basically just step in, who's going to give him some information why the man is losing his leg. And it's because what they're talking about in this game is how people get treated differently quite a bit. Pretty much with this, they're talking about how crippled people in the revolution at least get more money than the standard beggar. So he's getting his leg cut off so he can beg for more money. I think it's a very interesting take on the time and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's definitely just, you know, it's insane to think that like that is actually a thing that did happen in the past. So it is genuine, like that is something that actually did happen in the French Revolution, and so that to see it actually happening on screen is very just intriguing. A lot of games would be kind of scared to show that sort of thing. The man ends up introducing himself, and he has a vested interest in seeing the King of Beggars removed from his role. You'll follow Latucci all the way to a room where Arno will then just basically strap him against a wall, and Latucci ends up giving away all the information to Arno right away, telling you to head straight into the catacombs, where in the catacombs you'll then head through a load of tunnels and you'll find the King of Beggars. Latucci is there before you and basically ends up warning him of your presence. He acts like you didn't get the information from him. He tries to play it off, obviously, because, you know, he's basically a little rat. That's kind of the premise of his character, Latucci, anyway. But yeah, once you've killed Leroy, who is the King of Beggars, you'll then end up seeing into the memory and why he ends up being called the King of Beggars, and why he was happy to see Delasere dead. You'll end up finding out as well that there was yet another man behind the King of Beggars, who then gets referred to as the Grand Master. Once you're back up to the surface, you'll end up meeting the man that you met earlier in this sequence, and he's already taken up his new throne as the King of Beggars. He'll hand you a blade that is very similar to the Templar badge that killed Delasere. One thing to mention though that I actually really like about this character is that he kind of reminds me a little bit of Littlefinger or Varys from Game of Thrones. More like Littlefinger in the way that, you know, he's kind of lingering in the background, kind of plotting schemes and, you know, manipulating people into doing their bidding. Because realistically, he could have just not given that information out about where Latucci is and all this sort of thing, and stop Arno from going in, and, you know, it would have all been dealt with. Arno probably would have died there and then, that sort of thing, as he's a very novice assassin at this point. But he doesn't. He uses Arno as a pawn sort of thing to just get what he wants. Once you're done with this, you end up heading to a cafe just above the entrance of the assassin's underground network. This will be like a little home base that you can upgrade throughout this game. It's kind of nice, that sort of thing, but it's just basically like your your standard settlement sort of thing. It's okay. You can get compounding money and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's not much more that interesting. It's basically just the Auditory Villa. I would say that I definitely prefer it over the Auditory Villa or the Homestead in terms of like an actual setting. I think the Auditory Villa always has that, like, you know, homely feel, same with the Homestead, but I think the cafe is just more lively and it just feels like a more breathing, livable world than anything else, so that's why I prefer it. You walk back into the hideout and Arno will basically end up looking at the leader of the council, and you can tell that this man at this point is extremely fed up. He goes on to explain that the main issue is the lack of combatants in the people who are making up the political side of France, and go on a little bit about other little different things. After talking to the council about the death of the King of Beggars, Arno will then be told to go find the silversmith called Germain and find out his role in all of this. After getting into the mansion that the silversmith is located at, you'll basically end up finding your way inside, take out some guards along the way as well. After getting to Germain, he'll have a weird look. You know, both of his eyes are two different colours, that sort of thing. However, it's not something that you'll pick up right away, especially like in this cutscene. It's very quick, like they do come off the camera angles very quickly. It's kind of not the main focus of this. But if you know into Assassin's Creed lore, then you'll basically know that the two colours means that you are dealing with sages, which is what you're there actually hunting down. You'll tell Arno that he needs to be escorted outside of the building, and that he's being held captive. After almost escaping, Germain will then be held hostage by a guard. However, he'll then use the blade of this badge against the guy and stab him in the neck. He'll act like he doesn't actually understand what's happened, as if like this is the first time he's taken a life. Obviously, you end up finding out that he's the leader of the Templar Order, so this is not true. Basically, the guy's a great actor. He seems one of the only characters in this game that actually seems shocked when you interact with him, especially when it comes to killing people. You don't really see that much with these games. After talking to the man about Arno, you'll end up finding out about the first ever contract he had a very long time ago about the badges, and you'll be led off to another lead. You'll head to where Arno's leader's taken him, where inside this building there'll be loads of weaponries and explosives. So Arno decides to commit some, you know, arson and destroy the whole building. As you do, it's a daily chore of the Assassins, you know, Brotherhood. You commit arson or you assassinate political targets, you know, the usual. Once you've escaped from this though, you'll actually learn of the meeting point of the Grand Master of the Templar Order. You have to do some preparation before he arrives and then hide. The Grand Master will end up showing himself, and he is basically holding a Templar rally. I guess that's like the best way of describing it. It is just a rally. It's not really a meeting, it is more of a political rally. Like, there is nothing more. Like, he isn't exactly talking to people like directly, it is more of talking to a crowd of people, that sort of thing. When you've assassinated him, you'll learn more of his memories. Him being brought into the Brotherhood, and you'll end up finding out that in fact he is actually the good Grand Master of the Templar Order, and he was loyal to Delasare all the way to the end of his death. Once Arno reports his findings to the council, he'll then be tasked with killing the Grand Master. Once Arno reports his findings to the council, he'll almost get tasked with killing the Grand Master, with him then telling them that, you know, he's already done it, which then causes a massive uproar within the group.
Very well. I suppose the course is clear, Arno. Find Monsieur Lafreniere.
I have done so already, monsieur. He is no threat.
What are you saying, Pisspon?
I had a lead on Lafreniere. I followed it, and I killed him.
What the hell were you thinking?
How dare you defy the creed?
Next time you circumvent the council,
What gives
I'll
you
ring
the
you a
right?
new arsehole!
While this council admires your zeal, it is not your place to choose your own targets. You should have reported your findings to us.
Forgive me, Mentor. I believed I had found the man who ordered Monsieur de Lasserre's murder. When I discovered further evidence that suggested he was about to strike at the Brotherhood in force, I took action.
Believed? Suggested?
I am no longer certain of Lafreniere's motivations. In his memories, I saw him writing the letter that would have warned Monsieur de Lasserre of his betrayal. When he spoke of his impending attack, he mentioned a club in the Marais, not one of our safe houses.
What do you make of this?
I cannot say. I would like to investigate further.
I don't like this. The boy is a gifted assassin, but I fear he's obsessed with a private vendetta. Let another follow this lead.
We don't have time. Whatever Lafreniere was planning, it happens tonight.
He did ask permission this time, Guillaume.
Arno requests to continue doing the mission at hand, and he'll then be allowed to do so after, you know, the little bit of lecturing from them. He heads to the hotel in question that they're talking about, and you'll end up seeing Latucci there as well. Once you're inside, you'll then hear the remaining Templars talking about everything pretty much up to this point. You'll find out more of what you already know pretty much, which is that these Templars are the ones that betrayed Delasare. At the top of the building though, there'll also be an interrogation going on for something that you don't really know what's actually happening at this point, so it's not really too much of your concern at this point. You follow all of them and hide inside the basement. You overhear them talking about France as a whole and starting to talk about more of the plot of the political issues that's going on in France and the fact that they're kind of behind a lot of what's happened and the revolution itself. They also talk about killing Elise, so Arno is basically going to end up heading there straight away to try and stop what is going to be happening. When you get to the place, Arno will then smash his way in and find out Elise isn't there, and head to where the Templars were planning to get rid of her. Once you get there, you'll help her basically because she's about to be killed and briefly talk about what's going on. However, obviously not properly as you're doing this all amidst a fight. She'll agree to meet Arno back at the cafe though. Once you're at the cafe, Arno will then sit next to Elise, and they'll have this talk where Elise is very much against really working with people and honestly is very closed off at this point. One thing that I really like about this scene though is that you can actually really see their personal relationship coming through at this point. Now after Arno talks to Elise about meeting the assassins in the headquarters, he'll take her down there, where she will then end up talking to the council. After all this has happened, you'll end up mentioning Germain's name, and Elise will just start sprinting to the location that you mentioned as well. She'll talk to Arno about how Germain was meant to be dead as he was cast out of the Templar Order years ago. The guards will come circling in around you, as then you'll have to fight the Patriots who have come to kill Elise. One thing this game likes to do is really show off the relationship and temperament between the two characters of Elise and Arno, and these scenes really show this. You'll then end up finding out that this is in fact the man who killed Delasare. You'll agree to meet up at Mirabeau's estate to talk to him about the murder. Once you're in his room, you'll end up seeing Elise standing above his body where Mirabeau is dead. You'll do some investigation work and see how he's been murdered. It was poison, which is a very common thing to do with Templars, and there's a Templar badge underneath his pillow. Everything trying to align itself with Elise a little bit too perfectly. So obviously Arno does question if it's a setup. He does also kind of question if it is Elise. He doesn't really write it off as it couldn't be Elise, but he doesn't necessarily say 100%, yeah, this is only you, it's blatantly obvious, that sort of thing. Arno heads to a member of the council and he'll mention what's actually happened. You'll end up being tasked with just a day to figure out what's happened. You'll go and find a doctor who actually could be involved in the murder, as he may have acquired the poison from this doctor. However, he'll start running away immediately, and once you've caught up to him, he'll start talking to you about a hooded man who came after him. You'll follow the trail back to the place where the murderer ran off, and you'll climb to the rooftop and see Belek. Back at the place where you end up meeting Belek at the first point of this game, when you were first becoming an assassin. This scene is set in a really beautiful way, to be honest. The fact that it's raining, dark and moody whilst all this is happening around you is just some great work of art, all in all, and makes this so much better. You'll tackle Belek through the glass, and after taking him down, you'll then assassinate Belek, your mentor. You'll see all of his memories, such as the memories with Arno's father and the moments leading up to the death and poisoning of Mirabeau. This is one of those deaths in Assassin's Creed where the betrayal is meant to feel understandable, as he's a character, you know, that's meant to be Arno's mentor and that sort of thing. However, to be honest, it doesn't really feel that way. I didn't really care too much after he died, no matter which playthrough I did. Even on my original one, I didn't care, and on the playthrough for this video, I just didn't care, because he isn't really a character that gets developed too much. You'll end up going through another bridge, where you'll be in 1944 Nazi-occupied France, where you end up climbing the Eiffel Tower and you'll take down some enemy planes and that sort of thing with some turrets and that sort of thing. It's kind of cool, but yeah, you end up crossing the bridge and you're now back in Arno's time again, where you'll make your way back to the council, and Arno is definitely not the favourite assassin anymore. The assassins are now wanting you to go find some copies of some letters that Mirabeau has sent to the king that basically they don't want getting into the wrong hands. Pretty much, if they got into the wrong hands, the assassins could be ousted from basically public opinions, that sort of thing, because at this point in this time of the timeline, they're basically saying that the Templars and the assassins are kind of known, but they aren't fully. They're still like shadow organizations that have a lot more of a play than a lot of people think, but they're still well known enough that in the political sphere, they do exist. And that if they find these documents, it could end up meaning that basically all of them just end up getting eradicated. The revolution at this point is now starting to hit full force, and you can very much see the country is in full disarray. Once you're in the main chambers that you're required to be in, you end up meeting a man who's inside looking for something very specific. He's just kind of after whatever. That's kind of what he says, but he's after something very specific. He just doesn't tell you. You'll basically let him know that you're looking for some documents and that sort of thing. Afterwards, he'll then let go of his gun, put it away in the holster, and you end up finding out this is actually Napoleon, who you'll see in the background picks up a glowing artifact. I'm not 100% sure if it is an Apple of Eden. I tried looking up what it could be, but I couldn't actually fully find out. So if anyone does know if I am correct, if it is an Apple of Eden. I'm pretty sure it is a piece of Eden of some sort, but I couldn't find it 100%. So I do know that Napoleon eventually in the Assassin's Creed universe does get an apple of Eden, but I don't know if it's this one. So yeah, let me know in the comments if you do know. Once you end up escaping from this room, Napoleon will offer Arno a job in the military, if he was interested in it anyway. And then later on, you'll end up meeting with Napoleon once again. You end up being given a lead on where to find Rueil. I think that's how you pronounce it. I tried finding out pronunciations and that sort of thing. I tried going through all the gameplay. I just can't pronounce the name very well. So yeah, sorry for butchering it if any of you are named this man's name. So yeah, let me know if you do know how to pronounce it. So yeah. When you have infiltrated the compound, you end up learning about why this guy joined the Templar Order and his whole role in this. You end up finding out that he was actually an admirer of Mirabeau, and after being ignored, he ends up basically joining Germain, and will talk to him and offer him a role within the Templar Order. You'll see that him and another one, Marie, are basically being used by the Grand Master to starve out France, and make the revolution continue on for as long as necessary until the Templar Order can get what it wants. Now, what I do find interesting is it's kind of like a Iron Man villain situation, you know how pretty much all of the Iron Man villains, besides Ultron, have basically, at least in the films anyway, have all been kind of people who have admired Iron Man but get looked down upon by Tony instead. I don't know, I just thought it was interesting. Obviously, this isn't a new concept and it's not just Iron Man that does this, that sort of thing. It's just the first sort of thing that comes to my mind. Arno will then meet up with Elise once again and end up talking about what you've found out. You'll end up following the lead and try and find out where the grain is coming into the city. This will get you into a decent amount of stealth for this game, as you'll end up having to steal some orders off some people who are running the boat. After doing this, you'll end up heading to Luxembourg Palace. When you're there, you end up chatting with Elise, and you'll basically end up realizing that they're moving all the food into the palace to make it look like the royals are hoarding all of the food from the rest of Paris. And once inside, you end up finding Thomas Levier, who is the husband of Marie, who's actually being held captive as he found out that Marie is in fact a Templar and is starving out the city of France, and she wanted to keep him silent, so she imprisoned him. After you do this, you'll end up assassinating Marie and find out that she was actually on Germain's side the whole time since he was removed from the order, as she was one of the few who actually kind of was speaking up for him and trying to stop him from being removed. They don't really go into detail of why she sided with him, but to be honest, I would probably go down the route of if they were going to do anything, it would have been something along the lines of like they loved each other or something. So that's why she sided with him. Obviously, this is just my opinion. Like, if I was remaking the story, that's what I would have gone down, but yeah. You'll also get another lead about a man called Le Pelleter. Again, sorry for the butchery. You'll end up going and meeting up with Elise, where she's running off from a load of Templar soldiers again. You'll also see some people from Paris who are being shown a hot air balloon, and because of the wind, you end up having to chase the hot air balloon as, you know, Elise decides to jump into it to try and get away from the Templars. You jump in with it as well once you've caught up with it. You end up having this little romantic moment between Arno and Elise that's built up throughout this entire game, and the relationship even more building up. After waking up, you'll be on your way to meet up with Elise once again and talk to the King of Beggars. Or at least the new King of Beggars. You'll now be on a rooftop overlooking the palace that you need to infiltrate. And you'll learn from this man's assassination that he was actually the deciding vote in the King of France's death as well. And you'll also learn that Germain will have, as I quote, the finest seat to the execution. You'll head to where the king is being executed, and you'll basically end up on the hunt for Germain. However, he's already aware that you're going to be showing up, and he's basically classing all of this as the full rebirth of the Templar Order. Germain will head off whilst you have to fight the rest of the guards, and Elise is basically very much wanting you to go kill Germain, but Arno doesn't, as he doesn't want to leave her by herself. Once you're out of the area, Elise will be enraged by Arno, honestly, and basically just get massively annoyed and say that he shouldn't be wanting to keep her safe, he should just want to kill the target. You'll now be in the Assassin's headquarters, where the council will now exile Arno out of the Creed due to this.
What in God's name happened at the Place de la Révolution today?
Germain was there, and I know what his plan is. You have to...
You were told to leave that investigation to others.
Yes, but listen.
Yes, but listen. Is that the regard in which you hold the Brotherhood?
I knew this would happen. I told Mirabeau that you were too obsessed with your personal vendettas.
This is why I joined the Brotherhood.
Yes, not because you shared our ideas or felt called to the service. For revenge.
For redemption.
Call it what you will. You've defied the orders of this council repeatedly, pursued targets without sanction, and flouted our creed at every step.
Master Trenet?
In light of these actions, I find I have no choice but to call for a vote of expulsion. Master Bellier.
Agreed.
What are you...
Master Kimar.
Agreed.
Arno Dorian, you are attainted. Your rank and title are stripped from you, and you are hereby exiled from the Brotherhood of Paris.
You cannot be serious. Listen, I know what Germain is doing. I can stop him!
The decision of this council is final. We give you leave to go.
After this, Arno will awaken hungover in the estate from the beginning of the game. Not being able to find the pocket watch that, he treasures massively, he ends up trying to retrace his steps and heads back to a pub, where he'll end up chasing down a man and head into the main palace. This is a version of Arno that we haven't actually seen before, and this is the version that comes when he is filled with rage and just alcohol, and when he jumps fully into the side of his personality that is very addictive. Like what I mentioned from earlier on, he kind of jumps into alcohol very easily, same with how, he was very much a proper gambler right at the beginning of the game. Like, yes, people could probably say, oh, well, he just did it for fun, he knew he was going to get the watch back, all this, but I'm sorry, you do not gamble personal possessions unless you do have a problem, generally speaking. So yeah, I think that's kind of part of the character they were trying to portray, but they didn't really go into it fully. And once you don't end up retrieving the watch, Arno ends up having a recreation of what happened to Della Sera in front of him as he sat on the steps of the palace, in complete despair. Elise will appear to just give him the watch, where you'll then be greeted with this scene where it's a lot more heartfelt and understanding of Arno's causes throughout this game.
Arno. You look like hell.
You look like you want something from me.
That's a fine thing to say after you up and vanished.
You made it fairly clear you no longer required my services.
Don't you dare talk to me like that.
What do you expect me to say, Elise? Forgive me for not letting you die? I'm sorry that I care more about you than about killing Germain.
I thought we wanted the same thing.
What I wanted was you. I can't bear the fact that my carelessness got your father killed. Everything I've done since then has been to fix that mistake and to prevent it from happening again. You must have come here with something in mind. What was it?
Paris is tearing itself apart. Germain has driven the revolution to new heights of depravity. The guillotines operate nearly around the clock now.
And what do you expect me to do about it?
The Arno I love wouldn't have to ask that question. You're better than this. I'm going back to Paris. Are you coming?
There's one last thing I need to do.
All right. I'll go see to our transportation. Stay out of trouble. Don't get caught.
You're standing above the crowd, and basically you end up seeing the two brothers from the beginning of the game in a cage. Latucci is basically leading the beheading stage, and you'll now see the downfall of Latucci and how he ended up joining the Templar Order after you've assassinated him. It's actually because he was being told incorrect figures when actually he was completely right. This led to him basically becoming a Templar and his views becoming more and more radical, and ended up viewing a lot of the people within Paris as just parasites. So he is a character that, to be honest, they kind of tried to make a bit more human. I do like it a lot. They basically went down the route of saying, well, his opinion was correct, it's just the case of this is what happens to someone who does have a correct and valid, main point to make. However, a lot of the views can end up getting twisted and more radicalized later on down the road. It's now 1394 and you're basically in what appears to be a siege, and once you're out of this bit, you end up in a cart with Elise. And you'll be looking into the new lead, Robespierre. Their plan is to use the public against him and basically paint him in a wrong image and manipulate what people around him are thinking to get rid of him by the court of public opinion versus, killing him straight away. They'll also now poison him to make him look even more insane. He is, however, being arrested because of the threats that he made whilst he was poisoned by Arno and Elise, and you end up going to hunt him down to kill him. However, before you can get there, he's actually been set free by the Templars and now he is being held in a palace. And again, this is a way that they're showing you the different way of business between the Templars and the Assassins. I'm just going to play the scene for you, just so you can see what I mean. Just the different temperaments of how they were going to approach the situation.
Damn him! I sent for Gemma hours ago. Gemma warned me about you. You're one of them, aren't you? An assassin.
Not anymore. Where's Germain? Elise.
We don't have much time. Where is Germain?
I will never talk.
Then right. The temple. I should have known. I hope you enjoy revolutionary justice, monsieur.
Seize him!
This scene really shows the two different sides between the Assassins and how they work in the quiet versus the Templars, who are a lot more willing to be abrupt and loud. Now you'll head to the temple where you'll find Germain, and this will end up leading you to infiltrate the Templar Grand Master headquarters in the palace that you were actually at the beginning of the game when you meet the downfall of the Templar Order as they knew it back then. Arno and Elise, when finding their way to the temple, Germain has actually got the Sword of Eden as well, which was again the sword that you end up using just at the beginning of the game. Well, you don't end up using it, but you end up seeing the guy that you're playing as use it. Every time you go in to do an assassination, you end up being blasted away by the sword. By the time you go in for the final strike, you end up being blasted away and a pillar will land on Arno. But Elise sees Germain trying to get away and leaves Arno. And she ends up taking the fight to Germain, but she has no power over something as powerful as the Sword of Eden. You'll run at him to go assassinate him, however it's just too late. Elise is now dead on the floor from going into the pillar at the full blast. And Arno will now finish the job and kill Germain in a way that honestly you don't really see him doing in this game. He does it very slowly, kind of like he's trying in fact show off his vengeance that he's been going for throughout this whole game. You learn of his abilities and basically everything about him. He'll end up talking to you in your head about everything and why he was expelled from the Templar Order. Arno will then walk back over to Elise where he'll carry her body out of the temple. And you'll now get a dialogue from Arno, which I'll play now. This, in my opinion, is the second best speech in the franchise, just behind Ezio's speech at the end of Assassin's Creed 2. You'll also get a short end credits scene of Arno and Napoleon entering into the crypts, where you'll find Germain's skull was actually added to the catacombs as well. That is the tale of Arno Dorian, the assassin who loved a Templar. This is Assassin's Creed's take on Romeo and Juliet, a love that truly couldn't happen, something that was done really well in this game, and honestly, I would genuinely sit here and say that this game is one of the best Assassin's Creed games. This game's opening few hours does something that a lot of games struggle to do, which is keeping you engaged with what's going on, but also allowing you to actually see an honest representation of how the story is structured and honestly how the game will play out throughout this entire sequence. A lot of times you find a lot of games just kind of are really big and really amazing for the first few hours. A great example of this is Cyberpunk, for example. It's very well known that after the first 8 hours the story drops off. With this game, I would say the story is sustained throughout the entire thing. Maybe a little bit of weakness around sequence 7 and 8, but besides that, all the rest of the story works out perfectly fine, and generally I'd say the actual pacing of the game is done very well. We already described the opening earlier on in this video, but the beginning of this game, especially the first 10 minutes, is something that's done amazingly. The game starts extremely dark and is the fall of the Templar Order, something that we've never actually been shown before. Generally speaking, the Templars have had a massive seat of power. This is the Templars' version of the Masyaf Castle, and honestly, it's something that's done really well. I think this actually explains to a lot of people why the Templars are a shadow organization, especially after this time period in history. Because what a lot of people obviously don't know is that the Templar Order was a genuine thing at one point, and that they ended up getting burnt alive later on, and they got excommunicated anyway. As they're purged out of existence, at least in France anyway, you end up actually being able to have a sympathetic point of view towards the Templars, which is something that they rarely do within the Assassin's Creed games. And honestly, you only really experience this in Rogue and maybe a little bit within 3. But alongside Unity, Rogue did release, however that is a video for another day, and I will definitely be making a video on Rogue. So if that is something you are interested in, make sure to leave a like and make sure to put the notification bell on, because that will be coming out at some point in the near future. We're playing as, by the looks of it, the Grand Master of the Templar Order's most trusted foot soldier. We'll go and do the Grand Master's bidding and hide away the sword that was later acquired in the game. But what I love in this is that you've been shown something that honestly doesn't matter in this entire game's existence until right at the end. You're not shown anything or any signs of what the Templars are doing throughout this entire game, or why it's leading up to this, or why you've been shown this opening scene. But it's actually setting up the groundworks for something to come later that honestly you don't realise and you kind of forget about by the end of the game. And everything being put in your face right away is hopefully to add replay value to this game, which honestly is there. When you go to replay this game, you'll find that you actually meet Germain very early on in the game. You meet a lot of these characters very early on in the game, you just didn't know it. I found that the dark tones as well that this game puts across honestly was done in a very good way and doesn't just feel strange or odd, as a lot of Assassin's Creed is kind of, light-hearted overall with a darker tone underneath. Some games and even films or TV shows struggle to find their footing of what sort of story they want to tell, but this one honestly doesn't. They just dive in and hope you follow through with them. You'll then be bearing witness to a grueling end to the Templar Order at this point in the 1300s. We're then brought to a time that is a lot simpler and brighter. Arno's dad is telling Arno not to explore like children do, they'll do the opposite of their parents' bidding. And he'll get introduced right away to the second main character of this game, which is Elise. Arno and Elise will go off and do some childish things together, such as stealing the apple and basically believing everything is about them, like I mentioned earlier. But honestly, what this is showing you is the blind infatuation that Arno has for her, even from day one. He just feels the need to follow her, chase her around, and kind of do what she tells him to do. It is basically what happens throughout this entire game, and it's laying down the groundworks of Arno as a character and his relationship with Elise. Now after this though, the game's background noise starts to take a slight tonal shift. It suddenly becomes very eerie, and Arno and Lee start running towards to see where the guards are going. Arno attempts to hand himself in as he believes that they're after him for stealing the apple. This is just showing you the childish idea that honestly everything evolves around them at the start of life, and that's kind of something that every child ends up coming to realise later on is just not true. Arno will start calling to his father through the main hall, but with no response. And then Arno and you, the player, will see what's happened. His father is dead. Unknown of how, and even this answer doesn't even get resolved throughout the entire game. You'll have to play Rogue to find that one out anyway. But the dramatic tone of this scene is honestly one that I love personally. It really keeps you engaged with what's happening, and the pocket watch in particular, they really want you to keep note of throughout this game. This is the last thing linking him to his father, and now that his father is dead, the watch is broken along with it. The watch stops working, and the time for Arno seems to stop as well. This is always to remind him later in life of what he lost and the moment that he was at when he lost it. Elisa's dad will come through into the picture, offering him a hand. Arno looks down at his watch, and then you're playing as Arno 13 years later. Looking down at the same watch, all you can hear is the sound of the watch ticking and a faint banging sound in the background. As the moment starts to let in the sound, as it gets faster and faster paced, the door smashes open and Victor will come running into the room. And this will give you your first time experience of Arno as a character, and that he was everything everyone wanted him to be. He was like Ezio in many ways, but the most prominent thing about his character was the cheekiness he had about him. I'd say Ezio's humour was a little bit more sarcastic and just kind of dry. Arno's character is just done perfectly, and I think it suits him very much. This opening of Arno running away from the two brothers to then have to scurry back and be spoken down to really shows you at this point of the game how people view him as a character. Because of Arno's dad and where they were, you would have thought that he would be held in a bit more contempt more than others around him do. But it turns out that the only one who gives him any sort of respect is de la Serre. I mentioned this earlier, but one of the things that I think this part of the game highlights early on is that Arno has a little bit of an addiction problem. As you might believe, it's like he was just convinced to, give up his watch in a bet that he was never going to lose it in the first place. But one of the things that gambling addicts will bet their family belongings and bet personal items such as their house, and like I mentioned, personal belongings like this watch, just to hopefully win a chance of getting a lot of things. The game likes to show us the watch many times throughout this game, and even to someone who knows nothing about how storytelling works will be able to pay attention to this thing right away and be able to tell that this has some importance to the character you're playing as. This is something that I think this game later ends up trying to kind of jump back into later on with his drinking problem, where he ends up drinking his sorrows away after being dispelled from the Assassin's Creed. Besides giving you the basic understanding of how this game's mechanics go within the opening sequence of this game, it will try to show off literally all of the targets that you get to assassinate throughout this game, making sure that the one you know the least about throughout this entire game is in fact the main villain. And you'll end up meeting him in a couple of seconds right at the beginning of the game, which I think a lot of people obviously don't realise right at the beginning, because you don't know who the villain is of this game. On your second playthrough, and honestly some people even struggle with this on their third playthrough, don't realise that that is Germain, but yeah, he's in the beginning of it, and I really like this part of the game. Everything about this opening, from Arno being introduced to meeting Elise, is just foreshadowing, or at least hiding information in plain sight, and honestly, I'm here for it. Now besides this, one thing that does get built up even more throughout this game is the relationship between Arno and Elise, again, as he is chasing her throughout this opening scene, like he was as a child and like he does throughout the entire game. This entire opening is basically being about Arno wanting to just be in her presence once again. This interaction is something that honestly most games, especially AC games, struggle to pull off, a proper connection between characters without it feeling incredibly forced. And honestly, I don't even know if they've been able to do it to this day, or even before this game. I think Elise and Arno is the perfect relationship within this game, or at least the game franchise as a whole. You can tell by the animation, the voices, and everything about them that they both care incredibly about one another in the same manner as well, and that they have known each other for an extremely long period of time. So hats off to the Ubisoft devs, honestly, and the voice actors for this accomplishment. It's very well done. Once you're outside, Arno will then see de la Serre falling to the ground. A couple of men start running away, but Arno doesn't really care too much, as all he cares about is his surrogate father, which is basically very understandable in that moment. This is the beginning of Arno's story. It's honestly the most influential moment in his entire life. The guards will then be called over, and Arno will then be framed for the murder. The guards will knock Arno out, and the next thing you know, Arno is being dragged through the Bastille. He'll be thrown into a jail where he'll see a load of writing along the walls, and after going to sleep, Arno will awake, enraged by the man who has taken his pocket watch, and he'll be made to fight him. This will introduce you to one of the more important characters in this game, and also it will give you a little bit more of a combat tutorial. Once you've fought off Bellow, the way he becomes fascinated by Arno, the moment you mention that you know that you have eagle vision, that sort of thing, it's kind of interesting. I just love it, as it's one of the first times that they kind of ever acknowledge it in Assassin's Creed. Obviously they have brief mentions of it in all the other games, but I think this game is the proper one where Bellow is genuinely fascinated in Arno the moment he finds out that he's got eagle vision. But once he accepts Bellow's offer to train, he'll then overhear the revolution rising. I love this, as this is one of the areas of this game that they did really well, which is honestly the immersion within this world. I find this funny, as they really do struggle to do this in the games that have come out recently. Just to create an actual immersive area or immersive crowds, that sort of thing, they always struggle with it. You'll then be making your escape, running through the Bastille. Some guards are happy to fight, but others are just carrying away, and others are just looting. This immersion, honestly, for the fact that people are honestly just shitting themselves and they just lose loyalty the moment this ends up becoming an abrupt situation, just is pure immersion at its finest, like you've seen in many other games. But honestly, this game does it very well, because a lot of games will just have it so everyone starts fighting you. This game actually shows that obviously in a moment of war, they will just turn, they have no loyalty there. You'll get to the edge, and just before Bellow is about to jump off, he tells Arno that he'll be an amazing assassin. Once you jump off, the music will start, the revolution is rising, and you're flying over Paris. The words Assassin's Creed Unity will then appear. The first hour of this game is set up in such a way that you know exactly how the pacing is, you meet all the main characters, it's all done in such a brilliant way that genuinely a lot of games struggle to do. And as well, what I love about this is how the Assassins are actually a shadow organization who are kind of working in plain sight, but also an underground Illuminati type, which that's really what they're meant to be. Arno is a member of the public. He doesn't even know really who the Assassins or Templars are. He doesn't find this out until later on. And honestly, it's done so brilliantly. Everything keeps on going up at a scale that is actually amazing for Arno's character development and actually shows you a really good progressive character in the rebuild of Arno's spirit and person. The story isn't about Arno stopping Germaine, it is about Arno taking responsibility for the first time in his life, and that is really the premise of this game. By the end of the game, he isn't the same person that he was right at the beginning, which a lot of games struggle to do. It's very surprising, and if you actually have a look at them, you'll realise this. But Arno's character isn't the same one who would gamble away his father's belongings purely because he wants to win a game of cards. He wouldn't run from his issues all his life, and that is really what he does. He runs from a lot of his issues, and because of that, ends up leading to all of these turns of events that pretty much mean that he's not looked at very well in general. That's what you see at the beginning of the game. The only person who respects Arno is Delaserre. But this game is truly about taking responsibility. I feel like Assassin's Creed has that general tone, is that everything is about responsibility. So this section is going to be a bit more just rambly, I guess. So if you don't like rambly sections where I'm kind of talking off the top of my head, then make sure to just skip ahead to the next time section. But what I'm talking about here is what in particular I liked about this game. As obviously this is meant to be a critique, so I will be talking about also what I didn't like and how I would change it. What I've got down here is basically talking about how the assassin in this game is more of a pawn in this game. Ezio, for example, is definitely the one who feels in charge, especially in AC2. You end up seeing that he's pretty much is the main man in charge. Like, he isn't in the Order yet, obviously. But by the end of Brotherhood, he is officially the mentor of the Creed, so he has always been the one who's going to lead the ranks. Arno, however, never feels like a character who's necessarily in charge. He just does what he wants, and isn't necessarily doing it for the Creed itself. And what I really like about this, honestly, is just how it's one of the first times that you're seeing the Creed at like more of a full point, where you get more of the toxic side of it, where they are just using pretty much their assassins to just go take down targets, not really caring. None of the higher-ups really do any of it anymore. They don't really care. For example, you have Ezio, who ends up becoming the mentor, but he's still willing to get his hands dirty. All of these assassins who are in the council are not willing to do so. They just send Arno off on the little just quests to go kill people. And obviously, you're going to do that once you get higher up, but I just kind of really like how they do decide to just keep people in the loop. They just go, you know what, we're just going to send people down. We're going to send our foot soldiers, this sort of thing. We're too built up now. I think it's a very good take that they decide to do, because not many games, or at least not many in the franchise, were willing to go down this route. When you consider, for example, in Assassin's Creed 4, the Brotherhood is kind of more built up. It's mainly because you aren't playing as a character that's primarily Assassin's focused. You don't really care too much. You're primarily Edward the Pirate, who is an assassin second, versus, let's say, all the other games where you are assassins first. In 1, in 2, in 3, in 5, for example, you're an assassin first. In Syndicate, you're an assassin first. However, Unity's the only one where you kind of see the Order at its, like, height. Like, in Unity, you're seeing an assassin's order that's at its pinnacle. Like, it's not getting better than this. And that's kind of the point of this game, which is the idea of just pushing you down the path of, well, is it good that they're at this point? Maybe a little bit of starvation is kind of what keeps them going, keeps them in the correct mind space. Because we see what happens in Rogue when the Creed basically ends up becoming at its full power, and they kind of become a bit twisted in their ideals. They aren't necessarily evil fully, but they aren't necessarily good either. And it's something that I do find interesting, and I really did enjoy in this game. But yeah, that's pretty much one of the first areas of this game that I liked. Another area this game does really well, and I really liked, was the way they put across the Templars in this game. I found that the way they did this was just a brilliant mechanism. They decided to put across the Templars as if they weren't just these heinous bad guys. Like, the Templars were working and living alongside the Assassins at one point. They were actually working together. They were living together. They weren't dealing with everything in such a way that everyone had to be murdered from the other side. They realized, oh, maybe a truce might be a good thing. And you end up meeting, obviously, the fanatics of the Templar Order who undo all of that ideas. But realistically, you get a Templar Order in this game that you haven't really seen ever in any of the games prior. And you get close to it with 3, very close, but it isn't there yet. 3 is still very much the case of the Templars want the Assassins dead and not even considered to be coming back. In Rogue, what you're seeing is the undoing of what Haytham wanted. Haytham wanted to get rid of the Assassin's Creed, and by doing so it ends up leading to what ends up happening in 3 later on. But what you get in this game is just such a wonderful turnaround of events that you've never experienced in any of the other games before. You're looking at the Assassin's Creed franchise as just a general, oh, we're a shadow background organization who just wants the pieces of Eden. In this game, you're actually getting a more political stance of this game, as the Templar Order is effectively order, and then the Assassins are a bit more chaotic, that sort of thing. They believe in pure freedom, Templars believe in pure order. They're the left and the right of the political spectrum, basically, as a whole, and at the middle ground you get the actual perfect ambience of both of them put together. And this game does it really well, and I really enjoy it. I don't know, I know this is all very rambly at this section, but I genuinely love how they put across the Templars in this game and the Assassins, being more of an actual shadow background organization that aren't actually massively well known. A lot of the other games, because obviously you're playing as the protagonist, you never really get to experience the game as not an assassin or not anything else. You don't really end up realizing how in the shadows these organizations are, and also how much influence they have over the political sphere of this game. Like what you see with Germain when he's basically starving out France and hiding it all away to make it as if the political leaders are the ones who are like hiding away all the food. The next one is about Germain and how he was hidden very well in plain sight, and I love it. It adds a very much a fun replay value to this game that you don't really experience with a lot of games out there. I like saying this a lot, which is this game does a lot which a lot of games wish they could do, but the only reason why this game is looked so heavily down upon is because of its initial launch. The whole premise of Germain as a character is that he is literally masking himself from the world. He looks like this guy and he portrays himself towards, let's say, Arno, for example, as if he's this guy who could be harmless, who could do nothing. He gets shocked when he has to kill someone, that sort of thing, but it turns out, oh, he's actually the guy who's behind taking down the entire original Templar Order, doing all these things in the pursuit of a book and a sword. And because of that, you end up finding out a lot of things about Germain as a character, and I think it's actually done really brilliantly, and I very much enjoyed how they portrayed him in this game. A lot of the other games like to just go down the route of pure evil, pure evil, pure evil. I think in this, Germain is evil, but I wouldn't say he is the definition of full insanity complex. For example, I think that there's a lot of characters, let's say like Charles Lee, you see his development, but really he is just mental. He's just mental by the end of the game. And like you obviously get to see Charles Lee's descent, but like it's never really the case that you're visiting a character that you're like, oh, you're evil because, you know, you actually have good reason to kind of be evil. Like, you've got those characters out there who are really great characters because they have an understandable cause. It's why a lot of people loved Thanos, for example, is even though his methods were extremely bad, you can understand to a point of what he was getting at. And it's the same with characters like Killmonger in Black Panther, where people understood, oh, his methods actually make sense. And even, for example, the new Batman film is a great example of this. I saw this the other day, and honestly, it does a really good job. The Riddler's point is very understandable. However, obviously, the way he's going about it is very crazy, but it's very understandable of why he's angry. And I think that's what they tried to do in this game, was make an understandable villain, but because of the amount of amount of development, I guess that makes sense, I don't know. The lack of development of the character didn't allow you to kind of understand his fall a little bit more. I think they would have been better off at least giving a little bit more of a backstory towards all the characters, a little bit more anyway. But yeah, besides those two things, I've also got another one in there as well. The Arno and Elise dynamic in this game. What I genuinely loved that this game did really well is that Elise is pretty much the main character of this game. Arno is very likable, but honestly, I would say Elise is even likable. You could have put Elise or had Elise as her own game, and that would have been amazing as well. Games typically struggle to have two really powerful and eye-grabbing characters in this game, or at least in games in general, not in this game. And honestly, their relationship, being a Romeo and Juliet story but in Assassin's Creed, did work very well. And the fact that by the end of the game, Arno loses Elise and he doesn't do what he has done in the past and breaks his life down. He's actually grown as a character. Her death will be something that he remembers forever, but it won't be something that impacts his life in an extremely negative way that you've seen in the past. This story cared so much about Elise that you could swap the entire story out with her instead of playing as Arno, or they could have made a DLC where you got her entire perspective of this entire thing and people would love it. And honestly, it's something that borderline I would love as well. I think that her character was done really well in this game, and it's something that wasn't too forced and was done really just well. She comes across as a really strong character who everyone loved, basically, that I've ever spoken to. Everyone enjoys her character. And I think that is purely down to the fact that it's not a character that's being pushed down your throat as you need to like this character. You have that a lot in games. And I think, for example, a character that, like, if you wanted to pull from the Assassin's Creed trilogy, or not trilogy, the Assassin's Creed franchise, would be someone like Sigurd in Valhalla. He's a character that I didn't care about, and they were really trying to make you like this character. And honestly, he's an awful character. I hated him so much. There's a lot of characters out there in different games. You've got games like The Last of Us Part 2 that really struggled with this dynamic, and a lot of people end up hating one of the main characters of this game, obviously because, you know, she kills Joel. But besides that, honestly, the issue comes down to the fact that a lot of games struggle to make characters that are powerful purely because they care too much about pushing a ideal. That's down to the premise of it. And that's pretty much why I do love Elise as a character. She was a very well developed for the limited amount of time that she had, and was really powerful on screen. Every single moment she was in, you're caring about her more than you're caring about Arno, and you can understand why she is the way she is. But again, like I mentioned earlier, one of the main areas that I actually really did enjoy was just seeing how they both interact with each other throughout this game. We're now going to talk about what I didn't like in this game, which there is a few different things, and then I'm going to talk about how I would have changed those things. So to begin with, I think the lack of care about the other council members was something that I did actually really just didn't like in this game. I found that the only one that I really cared about was Mirabeau. Obviously, they kind of were pushing him across as the mentor of the France Creed, but you can't find that out anywhere. Literally, you can't, if you look into it, he's not labelled as the Grand Mentor or whatever. He is just labelled down as a council member, but he is very much put across as if he is the leader of the Creed. And honestly, the fact that he doesn't get put down as the mentor of the Creed doesn't make sense. Like, realistically, you know he is. He's the one who pretty much voices the Creed's opinions. He's the one who overrules other people's opinions, that sort of thing. He has a very wise opinion throughout most of the game. Once he's dead, you kill Belek, and honestly, the council doesn't really matter anymore. Yeah, sure, there's some consequences for Arno doing what he does. I think part of the issue was obviously that they just didn't seem to believe Arno at all in the reason why he killed Belek. They seem very, like, anti-him. Yes, sure, they lost the leader of the Creed, and they also lost Belek, who's a high-ranking assassin. But why don't you believe Arno at all? It makes no sense. And honestly, the fact that the council are so, like, automatically, like, anti-Arno is ridiculous. And the fact that they just don't really matter at all, they literally don't matter. And you end up finding that out later on in the game as well. You end up finding that out earlier on in the game. Like, you get introduced to them, like, all individually. They're all getting their own amount of time to speak. But then, like, by sequence 5, it's just Mirabeau. Like, nobody cares about the other assassins. What I would have done very early on to fix this issue would have been having more missions with the council members. And the reason why I think this would have actually helped the story is because you would have cared a lot more about them, and maybe even had them throw in some, like, reasons to why they don't really trust Arno, or, like, talking down to Arno a little bit more, and have Mirabeau talk down to Arno a little bit more than he does. It's kind of like a lack of faith in Arno. It just strikes you out of nowhere. Sure, they have some little disdain for him in little bits and moments, but they just aren't on screen enough, and there isn't enough talk about them for you to care too much about their opinion. Especially once Mirabeau's dead, the Creed doesn't really matter to Arno anymore. He doesn't care about any of them, and honestly, I didn't care about them as the player. I think a lot of it did feel very rushed with the council members, and they were just kind of sticklers to the rules way too much. Considering what the Creed is meant to be, they just stuck to the rules massively, to the point where it makes no sense. You have Ezio, who broke a lot of the Creed's rules. He is someone who kind of had to do what is required. Part of the Creed's viewpoint is that pretty much everything is permitted, nothing is true. The idea of that is pretty much anything to get to the end of your goal is allowed. We obviously don't kill civilians, but we're willing to do whatever is necessary. And that's kind of the core of the tenets of the Creed, and it makes no sense that they kind of just don't believe Arno. I don't know, sorry this is very rambly, but like, it just confuses me. I don't understand why they decided to do this, and hopefully it gets explained. Obviously it won't, but you know, hopefully, you know, eventually we might get a trace back to what happened. But yeah, that's one of the areas. I'm now going to talk about a few more. I think we should have had at least another 2 missions with Belek to at least give a little bit more background towards the relationship between him and Arno to actually make his death more impactful. I do really like the betrayal that ended up happening by Belek, however I do think that they should have had that 2 or maybe 3 more missions with him to build up that relationship between him and Arno. And it all stems really from the fact that Ubisoft are terrified, at least at the time were terrified, to make long Assassin's Creed games. Obviously they aren't terrified of that now. You've got, for example, Valhalla, which I played for 70 hours, didn't technically finish. I'm pretty sure the playtime on that thing is about 50 hours long if you want to just mainline the main story. So you've got a lot of time on a game versus then where, for example, it took me 2 sittings to complete this game. It took me 14 hours in total to finish this entire game. And if it was like, let's say, an extra probably 6 hours long, you would have had something that was really amazing. Now, the last thing that I think this game didn't do well is the fact that Arno doesn't really care who killed his dad. It doesn't really make sense to me. In Rogue, you end up finding out that Shay is the guy who kills Arno's dad, but Arno, by the sounds of it, doesn't really ever know. He doesn't know, at least during the main game itself, and I believe in lore and that sort of thing, he probably ends up finding out later on and that sort of thing. But I wish we got something, maybe like a DLC where he's hunting down Shay. Do I think that he would win? Probably not. I think that Shay would probably win even though he's older. I wouldn't have minded seeing a game where, for example, or a DLC where you get to see the end of Arno's life and it is him fighting Shay to avenge his father, and they get so close to the brink of both of them almost being dead. And then what you end up having is Shay just winning just by brute strength. I think that that would have been amazing, just end off the character as a whole of Arno. And it would have allowed a lot of fans who loved Shay as a character from Rogue and loved Arno from Unity just have a very good end to them. You could have ended both of their storylines by basically Shay being so just beaten up at that point that he's practically dead. He just only won slightly against Arno. I think that would have been a lot better than, let's say, just leaving it up in the air and mysterious. I think Ubisoft are just too scared at this point to just, you know, keep with the same character like they did with Ezio. They got scared of it because of the backlash by the end of Revelations, but I wouldn't have minded a DLC, for example, where we found out that Arno actually did find out who killed his dad. I do think this game did a lot of things perfectly, however everything has its downfalls. This game was the next step for Assassin's Creed, and I would say it's the pinnacle of the old gen Assassin's Creed games. The parkour was incredibly improved. The fact that you could go through a load of buildings, it just made the parkour seem like something that was actually fun and you could actually become really skillful within. Most Assassin's Creed games now, it's just the case of you look at wall, run up it, and you're now at the top. Now they added directional and multi-level control, and this was something that was actually incredible for the time especially. This is what they intended when they made the first ever Assassin's Creed game and the second game. This game does everything, and I mean everything, that the games before it did, but 10 times better. I wish we had more stuff like this now, but generally speaking they're too scared to make it because casual fans will be too scared of the parkour system and struggle a lot. But they also revamped the combat system. Or honestly, reverted it. Firstly, they changed the damage output so it required more than just one hit to kill an enemy, which means it couldn't have just been the easy counter but then hit once easy approach to everything. It actually required a high level of just hits in general, and it allowed you to feel a sense of progression of becoming a better swordman throughout this entire game. Because honestly, the other games do make you feel like, you know, your character, for example Ezio, at 17 is just a master of like sword play right at the beginning of the game. It's like, it makes no sense. He's never used one really. So it is something that's nice to see in this game, and again, most games nowadays just wouldn't do this. They just are too scared to do it. Another massive change for Assassin's Creed, especially at the time, was adding the crouch button, which sounds insane when you think about it, especially in today's context of gaming, but at the time, Assassin's Creed didn't have a crouch button. It's amazing, honestly I love it. It allowed so much more variety of stealth in this game and allowed indoor stealth to be so much better than just jumping between crowds of people who were just placed there for some absurd reason. And honestly, in this game was done so well, and I actually love the stealth in this game. However, what I also do want to talk about is the difficulty jump in Sequence 9. Now yes, I do know that this could just be the case that I'm just trash at the game, but I was looking at the difficulty from Sequence 8 and 9, and it's a fairly massive jump. During my playthrough for this video, I focused solely on the main story. And honestly, if you are like me and a lot of Assassin's Creed games, you do just focus on the main story because a lot of side content in these games doesn't matter, you'll not be high enough level for Sequence 9. Sequence 9 as a whole jumps massively in difficulty, and it's very unknown as to why. I think they just did it as one of those reasons of you're now at a very higher level, so if you do want to do this level easier, go do the side content that we've put stuff into. Even though the side content isn't the main part of this game, it's not actually fun, that sort of thing. It really did slow down my playthrough, and yes, I probably should have just gone and done some side content, but one of the things I hate in games is when they are trying to force you to do side content. Odyssey and Valhalla are games like this, and honestly, it's one of the reasons why games like Odyssey really end up on the descent for me for side content. Like, it could have some decent side content. I've played some decent side content of Odyssey, but things like Valhalla and Odyssey both struggle with the fact that people just don't like doing side content all the time. Sometimes they just want to play through the main story. Sometimes they want to do a ton of side content. I don't like it when games try to cap you off at what you can do just because of your level. I think that a lot of games should allow you to just kind of progress and just play through the main story as how you wish, and then all the side content, if they want to have that higher level, then sure. Main missions for a lot of games, it does irritate me when it's just capped off at levels. Like, personally, I'm fine with some of the side content in this game. It fits the character and what the assassins are like at the time. Like I mentioned, they're detectives, and that's primarily what these things are like. In terms of the gameplay now, we're going to also talk about the bugs. Like each time I've ever played through this game, I rarely ever have experienced bugs, and this includes on day 1 of release of this game, I hardly experienced any bugs. Now, I do know that just because I didn't experience bugs, that doesn't mean there was no bugs at all. Everybody knows about Unity's bugs. The only bug that really popped up in my playthrough was that Mirabeau's clothing seemed to be above his body, or at least doubled up on top of his body. It was really weird, it made me laugh for the moment, and it didn't allow me to take the moment seriously of his death. It is one of those things that I think made the game controversial, but what I really do think made people realise about the Unity bug situation was the type of bugs they were versus how many of them were actually experienced by people. Unity was almost treated in the same way Cyberpunk was treated upon release, which honestly, when you look at the two games, I would say Unity is a lot more of a finished game, especially when it came out, than Cyberpunk was. I think one of the main backlashes for Unity was strictly down to the fact that it had more really bad bugs on impact than, let's say, tons of them. I think more people experienced the bad bugs, let's say 1 in every 10, than, let's say, everyone playing Cyberpunk pretty much experienced a bug. Now let's talk about the modern day of this game, or at least the lack of the modern day. I don't really know how I feel about it. I lean more on the side of I'm okay with it, generally speaking, especially for the time when this game came out and how bad the modern day was by this point. But generally speaking, I think it just lost a certain something about this game because the modern day story didn't really get pushed in any direction after this game. In this game and Syndicate, nothing really happened to the modern day. But again, I do kind of like this because I didn't get dragged out of the Animus every like 3 hours. I think for the time when this game came out, the lack of modern day story was actually perfectly fine. Ubisoft were really trying with this game and tried to understand a lot of people's criticism, which was there was nothing really valid for the main story plot, and it's very hard to one-up a Doomsday plot. So they are still going down the Sage route within this game, but all in all I'm fine with what they decided to do with the modern day. I really enjoyed this game's pacing, and I honestly do think that if you were pulled out of the game for 10 to 15 minutes at a time for long, tedious main story plots like you did in games like, you know, the game where you run around on an iPad for basically 10 minutes to 15 minutes, just because, you know, they want to just do some main story of the modern day stuff and push that narrative a bit more in Black Flag. It's just a bit irritating, isn't it? So I just didn't want to do it. I think the fact that that wasn't in the game really helped this game's pacing and made a lot of people probably love this game, mainly because you weren't being pulled out of the Animus. There's a commonly held belief that the story's settings such as Hogwarts in Harry Potter, the apartment in Big Bang Theory, or other games like Dunwall in Dishonored and Skyrim within Skyrim are part of their own characters in themselves, which honestly is very true for this game as well. I think Paris is done in an outstanding way within this game. When you're walking around this game, you genuinely feel like you're in revolutionary Paris. When I was running around this game, I genuinely from time to time, which is something I rarely do, was walking around and just walking casually, just taking in all the immersion, and it sounds amazing. The sound design in this game and graphic design for this just felt correct. There are some moments, for example, when I had to assassinate Latucci, who, for some reason this game, even to this day, this franchise struggles with this, which is dealing with how to deal with mobs and just shouting audiences and that sort of thing. It takes away from the immersion. It happens in Valhalla a lot, but honestly, I don't understand why they struggle so much when they're a company that does really well with general immersion within the cities themselves. But when it does come for this game, when you're just walking around Paris, it is quite something else. I can't lie, I love just running around Paris because it just felt like one of the most realistic creations of a city within the Assassin's Creed franchise, and honestly, I would say Revolutionary Paris in this game could be on par with Novigrad. Novigrad is a very, very well done city. I'd say this game, and Paris as a whole within this game, is just under. It's my second favourite city within gaming. For a lot of what this game doesn't do well, the one thing that Ubisoft have always done well is city and world design. I think everyone can agree that the worlds that Ubisoft do create are amazing and honestly are spectacular in their own right. Multiplayer. This is a word that nobody really puts together with Assassin's Creed, generally speaking. In this game, they had their second attempt of multiplayer, and this was really their proper first attempt of what they were going for anyway. And honestly, the concept of it is really cool. I love the concept of it. The execution of it, however, was absolutely horrendous, and to this day is absolutely god-awful. You cannot play that at all. I have terrible internet when I first played this game. I could hardly move. The internet, yes, that was one of the things, but the servers were dreadful. Everyone on launch agreed that the servers were dreadful to the point where you either teleported around or you just couldn't move. And then people who did have a good time, generally it was because they were the host, so they were able to do things. But honestly, multiplayer in this game was such a bad travesty. I can't actually believe how badly they failed at this and allowed it to launch in the way they did. Honestly, I can't see a return to multiplayer for Assassin's Creed anyway for a very long time. I think maybe one day we might see an MMO RPG Assassin's Creed game, which to be honest, I wouldn't be against. I'd love the idea of, let's say, For Honor style game, where let's say you have all the different creeds across the world and they're doing different things and you can go between different cities and all this sort of thing. It'd be Ubisoft's biggest attempt of anything ever, but I wouldn't be against it. I think it'd be a very cool idea anyway, that you could fight for the Templars or the Assassins, and what you do is you try to take pieces of Eden, and by the end of each season you have a winner. For example, like the For Honor way. I wouldn't be against that, to be honest, but the multiplayer in this game was atrocious, and would I recommend playing the multiplayer? No. All in all, Ubisoft's biggest downfall with this game was the multiplayer, purely because of how much they did promote the multiplayer, and it's surprising how badly they failed considering how much promotion went behind it. Now, the claim of the most underrated game is something that you'll hear a lot about many games, but honestly, Assassin's Creed Unity is one of the biggest, most well-known, underrated game in existence, in my opinion. And I'll talk about right now why I genuinely think that. But it's not underrated because people just don't know about it, it's underrated because of its initial release. Ubisoft released this game a little bit too soon to hit schedules, and honestly, if they had just never added the multiplayer mode as a massive part of their marketing for this game, then probably this would have received a lot better representation. Under the hate that this game has around it for its initial release, and what all the videos on the internet show off of this game, you'll then end up finding a great world and honestly a main story that is quite good. I'd say if it had a little bit more background to the relationships with Arno and honestly some of the other characters in this story, you would genuinely have one of the best stories in the Assassin's Creed franchise, if not the best. This game is at least the most underrated Assassin's Creed title, as when people think of Assassin's Creed, they think of Ezio, Edward, and Bayek. But they only think about Arno when people talk about the bugs that come to mind about it. The only game that comes close to this when it comes to people's dislike upon launch is games like Watch Dogs, No Man's Sky, and Cyberpunk. All four of these games had massive issues on launch, some more than others, but Unity truly got buried by Ubisoft. Now, my final verdict for this game is a 7 out of 10. Now, originally I was planning to give it a 7.5, but then I was thinking to myself, to be honest, does it deserve it? No. I think this game is a very great game and that everyone should play it if you have a spare basically like 3 days worth of sitting down and playing for a few hours each day just to play through, or if you want to have a game to play through within a week, let's say you've got a couple hours after work to play through it, you should play Unity if you want a decent story given to you. But honestly, it isn't an amazing story. The story is very good, but I would say it lost out on a lot of things like I mentioned in this game, such as having a lack of just willingness to be longer than it needed to be. For example, they kind of went straight to the point with a lot of it instead of building up any background information between characters. Elise was definitely the main character along with Arno, but generally all of the side characters had no proper development. You don't really care when they either died or just betrayed you. All in all, it has to be a 7 out of 10. This was a very big ambitious project for Ubisoft, and that is why I'm giving it a 7. I could have given it lower than that. A lot of ratings for this game are worse than that, purely because of the bugs off of launch. However, I don't care about the bugs massively. I don't think they were as big of a deal as people made them out to be, so that is why I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. It did Immersion brilliantly. Paris, and Revolutionary Paris in particular, was absolutely outstanding, and that is why this game will get a solid 7 in my opinion. Now, with that all being said, I hope you guys did enjoy this video. It did take me a very long time to make. Let's just say, for example, I'm sat here reading the script right now, and I finished this script about 3 weeks ago. or so. I then played Red Dead for an entire week. So to be fair, I binned off a week of doing this video because I played Red Dead 2. But this video did take me a very long time to make. When I say it did take me a very long time to make, I mean, let's just say recording it, only about 2 sittings. The script of it, however, took me about 2 weeks to go through. And then after that, the recording process of it took me about 2 weeks, purely because of doing it in different sittings. This sitting, however, that I've done today is the lot longer one. I've literally been sat here recording since 2 o'clock. It is now 7 o'clock. So that gives you a rough idea of how long this has taken me in just this sitting alone. So yeah, if you guys did enjoy this video, please make sure to leave a like, join the Discord down below, everything like that, for future content on this channel. Like I mentioned earlier, I do upload whatever I want on Wednesdays. I upload a game critique every single month, or at least I try to. And then as well as that, I upload gaming content every single Friday. So if that is something that interests you, make sure to leave a like, subscribe for more content, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good one.